There's a process
there's
to
a
do
process
everything.
and spending time and sitting in front of a television and trying to read the paper and just going to cafes and listening to people and going out with your colleagues at night and just sitting there not understanding a freaking word, but just listening. And you can learn so much from people's faces and their hands and, writing down, what does that mean? And then people made fun of me. I was walking around always with my dictionary. What was that word you just said? And I'd write it in my little notebook and it, it turned out pretty well.
How was the food culture over there when you arrived? Was it what you expected it to be or what you wanted it to be?
I didn't have a whole lot of expectation. The reason why I went originally is because so many, looking at successful American chefs were either European by birth, had lived and worked in Europe, or had worked under European chefs in the United States.
Right.
So, it's like, why is that? All right, well, all I wanted to do is just go and see what all the hoopla more or less was about. So that's why I went, and that's why I said the plan was 6 months. I was just going to kick tires and look around, and I liked it so much.
Yeah.
And just the respect for the ingredient and the respect for the table and the importance of what a meal is and the importance of dining is an end game. It's not something you do on the way to the theater or something else. It's not, let's go have dinner before we do this. No, we're going to go have dinner.
Yeah, that's our thing.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to do. And we're going to stay there for 3 or 4 hours, and we're going to have several courses, and we're going to talk, and we're going to talk, and we're going to talk some more. And it's all about conversation, the art of conversation, the enjoyment of being with somebody you want to be with, or maybe not so much, at the table. And it's things that we try to instill in what we do today as well.
I love that for me, your restaurant is only an hour south of the border.
Right.
Because I feel like, obviously intentional from your side, is that you've incorporated that in what you guys do here, that this is about a meal as the end game.
Right. I mean, that's what I'd like to think. I'd like to think that you come here to be here and you're not thinking, I got something else to do.
Yeah, and I say that I love that it's an hour south of the border because I think in the United States, in most cities, maybe not in Frisco or New York or Chicago, but I think in most cities, people lost the art of going out and enjoying somebody's company and a meal and making that their end game there.
Well, I think that it depends on where you live. Like San Diego is a place where there's so many other things to do, which is, I think, why it makes, a higher-end food scene, and it makes professional sports teams and things like that much more challenging to really have success with, because you're competing with the beach and the golf courses and the surf and the beautiful weather and hiking in East County. And there's just so many other things that are available in Southern California that, in New York City, hey man, that's part of the culture. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really like here about Guadalupe Valley is, unless you really like to ride your street bike, there's not a whole lot of off-roading in the valley itself because we don't really want it.
Yeah.
But go over the ridge and it's all you can get,
it's
right?
Everywhere.
And so once you're in the valley, it's pretty much eating and drinking. You're here for the wine culture. You're here for the food culture. You're here to enjoy the scenery, the weather. We have pretty much perfect weather. We wished we had a little more rain, but it's an amazing. You've been here when it's cold. You've been here when it's warm. It's still gorgeous, no matter what time of year it is.
It's palatable, enjoyable. It's everything you could ever want in an experience.
Sure.
Right. Let me just touch on Europe a little bit more because I'm just fascinated, and I think people are. I come in here and I meet you for the first time, and I enjoyed a meal that you made, and you always wonder, like, how did this guy get to be what he is? How did he learn how to make this food in front of me that makes me go home and tell every single one of my friends they got to come here? And I realize that that's a part of your past, and I don't want to skirt over anything that you learned in Europe or what you can share with us about that, because I think it's fascinating how you got to where you're at today. What was your biggest takeaway from Europe? I mean, you were there for a long time. You probably worked for some great people.
I was very fortunate to be next to some phenomenal chefs. My first really important stop was in a place called the Auberge de Lion d'Or, which is in Coligny, about 20 minutes on the Rive Droite, the east shore of Lake Geneva, outside of Geneva, like if you're driving to Evian. Two chefs who I respect, unbelievable. Tommy Byrne, who was born in Ireland but had lived, when I was there, 25 years, I think, in Geneva. So he had forgotten more English than I had learned. I'd learned French, so our conversations were really interesting. And then Gilles Dupont, who was from Annecy, France. If you think about Geneva, it's surrounded on all sides by France. So a lot of people, sort of like the Tijuana, San Diego thing, people cross the border to work. In Geneva is very, very similar. And so, my first day, I showed up. I had followed a girl to Geneva, didn't have a job, didn't have a work permit, and I spent 3 months in her apartment every day, going out and going to restaurants and trying to get a job. And everybody, my French was horrible, and I would say things like "Je suis un cuisinier américain," which means I'm an American stove. Right? And
that'll get you a job every time.
Oh, heck yeah. And everybody would answer, sure. Come back with a work permit, and we'll hire you, no problem at all. So you go to the work permit place. They go, no, you have to be sponsored by a business to get the work permit. So it's like, okay. So finally I found out in the Lion d'Or that every Thursday, and the reason why I kept going back to the Lion d'Or is the Irish chef spoke English.
Wow.
So I knew I had a way to communicate with, because most of the time when I'd go into these places, I'd be talking to the chef and they'd have to call in a waiter or a waitress to translate.
Yeah.
Because either they didn't want to speak English with me or they just didn't speak English.
Yeah, sure.
And they weren't ever very good interviews. And I always walked out like feeling like I wanted to throw up because I wanted to work so bad. And I said, I don't need you to pay me. I just want to be here.
Yeah.
And ended up, I went to this first meeting with these chefs, and they talked to me, and they were very nice. And they said, but we can't hire you. I'm sorry, there's nothing. So I came back the next Thursday because I found out it was their meeting day. And I sat there in their bistro, had a cup of coffee waiting for them to finish their meeting. And then they'd get up, and I'd go up and I'd talk to them. I said, I told you I don't have a job for you. That's okay. Have a great day, chef. And I came back the next Thursday, and 8 weeks.
Wow.
Until he finally said, you're really bugging the shit out of me. Tell you what, we're coming into Christmas season. I can give you a job for 3 weeks. I can't pay you. If you hurt yourself, I'm putting you out on the street. And, if immigration comes, I don't have any idea who you are. Okay?
Those are some tough terms.
Sounds good. No, but I'll feed you. Great. And after 5 days of them watching me work, they said, we'd like to offer you a work permit.
Wow. So
then they sponsored my work permit. I ended up being with them for, I think the permit, the visa was 18 months. My first day of work, I walk in and Gilles Dupont calls me over and said, Drew, come over here. We're buying truffles. He spoke really good English. So this guy walks in with this basket that was probably 3 feet across, filled with the first winter truffles of the year.
My mouth's watering.
Right? And so the chef, and now he's teaching me this is how we buy them. So he picks up the truffle, and takes his paring knife, and cuts off a big piece and starts chewing on it. And he goes, no, I don't want that one. And he's giving me a piece as well. And then he picks up another one. Then he picks up, and then at the end he starts picking them based on what they look like. And we ate probably 100 grams of truffles each. Gosh. Trying to, and this is my first day, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah.
I love this job.
The Eagles landed, right? And and went on. And then after like a year and a half there, now I can speak French. And now I was in charge of their garden. So many just really unbelievable things happened to me there. They sent me to work with Paul Bocuse. So I was a chef de partie with Paul Bocuse. Rest in peace, Monsieur Paul. And, that's like the Mac Daddy, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, that was something really extraordinary to see the discipline and the respect for the ingredient and the respect for tradition. There's no, if you asked a question why, I remember we did a mussel soup that we ended up pureeing everything at the end, but to make the mussel soup, you had to cut all the vegetables into really fine julienne, like strips.
Yeah.
And then me being a pragmatic American said, why are we cutting everything in a julienne if we're just going to puree it?
Oh.
And the chef de cuisine says, we don't ask questions about the recipes. We follow the recipes.
Yeah.
We chef, and then, we went on.
We learn.
And we learn. And I still wonder why they cut it in julienne. But that's a house that, was unbelievable at the time. I mean, just for me to be able to have the chance to go through those kitchens is, there's no school like that in the world, right?
Yeah, and listen, I know that some of these credentials are on your website of where you worked. Can you, just for our listeners, give us the credentials of those two restaurants, just so they understand the magnitude of where you've worked at?
So the Lion d'Or, I think at the time had 17 points Gomio and 1 Michelin star. I think they made it up to 2 in like 19. Paul Bocuse, 3 Michelin stars. As far as I know, he's the longest running 3-star restaurant in Europe, in the world. Trois Gros is the second, I think, in Rouen. And then from there I went to work with Jacques Maximin in Vence, which is just up from Nice. What impressed me about Jacques Maximin is every morning I lived on the property, so I was the first one in the kitchen in the morning at 6-something, and there was the chef, Monsieur Jacques, cup of coffee, handwriting the menu for the day, every single day. And we changed the menu every single day, and he handwrote it. And what I thought was the most interesting is he didn't order. The market came to him. So he had been working with the same purveyors for so long that his butcher knew to give him the best that was there. His fisherman knew to give him the best of the day. The mushroom gatherer knew to bring him, and just because the relationship was so extensive and had, all the purveyors were his friends.
Yeah.
Or had become his friends over the years he had the restaurant. And from there, I went and I had my first job as chef de cuisine, which was in a hotel just south of Hamburg. Had the honor, I guess, to be awarded a Michelin star my very first year on my own, which was not necessarily the goal. The goal was a full restaurant, and we earned a star, which I thought was pretty exceptional. And it's something that even still goes with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell everybody.
Well, it's a little unfair because the star doesn't go with a chef and it doesn't stay with a restaurant, and Michelin doesn't rate Mexico, so it's unfair to say that I'm a Michelin star chef.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that at one point in my career I earned a Michelin star.
Sure.
Right? There's a big difference between the two.
Yeah.
Because the guys that are current Michelin star holders and all that, I mean, I respect those guys more than anything, and you have to give them their due because they're the guys that actually are holding, have the stars on the shoulders today.
Yeah.
And we don't use that in our marketing. Other people say that about me. We don't ever say it about ourselves.
Yeah, got it. At what point, and we'll move out of Europe here in a second, but at what point were you in Europe and you just looked around and go, my God, I'm in Europe as a chef? I mean, there had to be a moment where you realized you have arrived in that world.
I think it probably happened, every day you walk into the market that's on the street and you just see the perfect chanterelles and the perfect raspberries and the perfect vegetables and the perfect fish and everything. There's so much respect for ingredient especially in France and in Switzerland and Germany that respect for cheese and the origin of the beef and there's no concept of farm to table there because that's all they've ever known.
Yeah.
And
we're over here in the U.S. bragging about it.
Right. And that was the thing for me is when I got back and back on this side of the world, I was working for my last job in Europe, I was the executive chef at the Four Seasons in Berlin, Germany.
Mm-hmm.